That one's yours, isn't it? Isn't that one yours? But this one, is this yours too? My name is Burns Brady, and I'm an alcoholic. I really don't like to talk, but I love the introduction, so I think I'm just going to go sit down and let you do it again. I love that. Most of that was true. You'll have to figure out the part that isn't as we go along through this. It's really good to be back up here. I've talked in this room before. It was some years ago, and I really don't know how many, but I do know I talked in Juliet almost 25 years ago. At that time, I talked with a person in Al-Anon named Beverly B., and we developed a real fast friendship with her and her husband. And Juliet's been a real important place for me in my recovery. I have a lot of friends here, and it's good to see them. I'm old enough I don't remember the names as well as I should, but hell, I don't remember mine that well, you know. The other day somebody said, "What's your name?" And I said, "As far as I know, it may be Fruit of the Loom." That's where I keep most of my name. Well, like you put it inside your underwear. Remember when your mama used to put your name inside your underwear? Anybody old enough to remember that isn't going to admit it, I'll damn sure tell you that. But Mama did on mine. So it's good to be back up here. It's good to be with you. It's good to talk about recovery. It's just, it's a good night for y'all, and it's a good night for me. First, let me thank Rachel for, I loved it. I really appreciate what you had to say. Sometimes those of us who do a lot of talking, and I don't do that much anymore, but we get almost believing we got a song and dance act we have to put on. And it can get really, really delusional sometimes over the years, and I was impressed with and really appreciate the simplicity and the honesty and the depth of what she feels that Al-Anon has done in her life. I hope I'm able to convey that to you in my talk. One of the things that I'm not intimidated by it anymore, because I know that if I'll just pay attention, God will have me say what I'm supposed to say. Sometimes I don't pay that close of attention, but I sometimes get worried that I'll not be able to tell you the depth of what AA means to me. It has given me my life. There was a time when I thought I could tell you everything about my life, and today it's almost impossible for me to believe I can tell you anything about my life that anywhere close approaches to the significance that it has had in my life. I do know that if I kind of move over and don't have the fear and let my ego get involved with how scared that's going to make me, then I can tell you the joy that has come in my life as a result of being a member with you in this organization. It is my life, and it has led me to a life that I didn't think I would ever be able to have. What you've asked me to do is talk with you about what I was like, what happened, and what I'm like today. As I go through this, I'll talk a lot about the big book. I am a big book thumper. I am not a big book lawyer. I will try, and most of the time am successful in not telling you how you have to read the book. Sometimes I will tell you how you have to read the book. I don't really set out to do that, but it just happens, you know. That's one of the reasons I go to a lot of meetings, because I really do know what you need to do, and whether you want to do it or not, you damn well get around me, and that's what you're going to do. You know, that's just the way it is. If I have a sponsor who reminds me that that's not always the best way to deliver a message. But I will talk about the big book in depth. And the reason I'll talk about it is because I lived for the 10 years. I've been sober 33 years. My sobriety date was December the 1st, 1977. And for the first 10 years that I was in Alcoholics Anonymous, I didn't read the book or do the steps. I went to 7 meetings a week. I had a sponsor that I called 4 to 5 times a day. There were about 8 of us that ran inseparably. Our wives, we cook out on weekends, we play golf together. I mean, we were just inseparable. There were about 5 or 6 of us. Used to call us the little pygmy elephants. They said they run along. If number 1 elephant stops, everybody else got a brown nose, because that's where we were. And it was delightful. It was absolutely what I'd been looking for. Some fun without drinking. some fun without drinking, because there was a time when drinking was fun for me. The last 2 years of that drinking was absolute hell. About as close to hell as I think a person could ever get without having a temperature elevation. You know, it was just pure hell. But it was fun, and I'd found fun again without alcohol, and it was delightful. We were crazier than goats, but we had fun. God, we had fun. But we couldn't stir poop with a spoon. We didn't have enough sense to start a car. And most of it, hell, I was practicing medicine. I could practice medicine, but I literally couldn't add 2 and 2 and get a consistent number for about 2 years, you know? And that's just the way that it was. I mean, that's the way that it was. The whole marching order in Louisville, Kentucky at that time, I'm not saying it's what it was nationally, I don't know. But I can tell you what it was in Louisville. It was don't drink, go to meetings, get a sponsor, tell him what's wrong with you, he'll tell you what to do, and then go save a drunk. We left out that muddled middle. My first 4th step after I came out of treatment, I was 4 years sober, and my sponsor called Hazelton, and they sent him a 300-question questionnaire, and he gave it to me and said, answer those questions, and I did, and that was my 5th step. When I was 8 years sober, he wrote out 200 questions and gave them to me and said, answer those questions, and I did, and that was my 2nd, 5th step, and 4th step. And that's where I was. I had a wonderful fellowship. I had no design for living. And this was going to set my ass on fire. I had no way to deal with what I subsequently came to know are the character defects if I believe the book is right. Self-centeredness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. I don't know if that's what your big book says, but I can tell you that's what I've gained about 15 pounds, so this 15 and a half collar is damn tough, and it's getting tougher as I go along, let me tell you. But I did not have that design for living. That very thing that today is the backbone of how I deal with me to deal with you. I didn't have it. I had an incredible fellowship and no design for living. Now you say, okay, fair enough, statement stands on its own merit. Let me tell you how it played out. My first wife and I were married for 17 years, and I'll probably talk about that later. She kicked me out of the house in 1975. I did not run around on my wife, but I finally drank enough whiskey she couldn't stand it anymore, so she kicked me out. And that just tickled the hell out of me. I couldn't have been happier. Man, I just tell you, that was the best thing that happened to me since I was born. She kicked my ass out of the house. I mean, tell you what, that woman didn't have a prize, but she was a mean-spirited woman. That's all I can tell you about. She had a streak of meanness in her. That's all there was to it. I mean, living with me would make you mean, but she was just mean by birth. You know, I mean, that's just what it was. She just had an ass-kicking attitude all the time, and I was the one that had the ass that seemed to be standing in the way. And so she kicked me out of the house, and I want to tell you what, I drank that whiskey, and I got me a white Corvette, and I got me a light blue leisure suit, sky blue, and that was a white Corvette with solid blue interior, and I mean, I was something. Now, in the 70s, y'all are laughing at it, but that's a pretty cool outfit. I got me a trunk full of Chevy Regal Scotch whiskey and a sterling silver mint julep cup. And I mean, tell you, when I got there, I came in with that thing clutched in my hand, and the party was ready, you know. Now, I don't know what anybody else did from that time on, but I had a hell of a time, and that's just the way it was. And so I just womanized and ran everywhere I could run and had the best time I'd do and everything I'd ever wanted to do, but my conscience and upbringing said this is not what you're supposed to do. But with that firewater in me, I could just do it. And then the next day when I thought that's not the right thing to do, I just drank some more firewater and did it again. Just do it. And it was a joy. And I ran in to Casey. And Casey is my second wife, and we've been married 33 years. And Casey the minute I met her, I knew that this was an incredible woman. And I knew this was exactly right for me. And she knew I was exactly right for her. And we've been together ever since then. We had one date and moved in with each other, so we had a typical alcoholic relationship. And we drank together, drink for drink, and we had a good time. Casey's 14 years younger than me. Her daddy was bipolar, and she saw her mama take care of her daddy, and I watched my daddy take care of my mama, which I'll tell you about more as we go along. And so Casey took care of me, I took care of Casey, and our pathology brought us together, and our hearts and souls and joy and AA and just the goodness of the homes we came out of have kept us together with an intimacy and a love that I never thought I could ever experience. It has not been easy getting there, especially when I talk about the alcohol and no design for living and no way to deal with irritable, restless, and discontented, no way to deal with self-centeredness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear except tell my sponsor. Except tell my sponsor. Now, don't get me wrong, I still tell my sponsor, but I got a design for living. And when I tell my sponsor and we pray about it, and there's about 4 or 5 guys that we're real close, eventually, as it says, and we're talking about, sex in the big book on doing an inventory, we can seek consultation, but eventually it's down to what me and God think about it. But I do all the homework. But I didn't have that except to talk to my sponsor. We'd been married when I quit drinking, and we'll go through that later on. Casey quit drinking. She went to Al-Anon for 6 years and heard her story and came into AA. When she came into AA, her sponsor was one of my icons. She'd been sober for about 25 years. It was circuit speaker. Just telling you, she really did have a good program. Not that circuit speakers have a good program, but she was well known and a wonderful lady. Fit in the same category with Tom that we were talking about, be that kind of person. And so she was sponsoring Casey, and she says to Casey, and this is the first 10 years, remember, she said, what do you want to be? He said, you absolutely adore Burns, and he adores you. And the way we adored each other, or that I adored her, is she fit right here on my hip. And every time the seasons changed, I had a whole new wardrobe sent to her. I never asked her what she wanted. I just sent the clothes. Every 2 years, I had them deliver a new car. Never asked her what kind of car she wanted. At least 4 or 5 times a year, we'd go on some of these vacations that were just as good as you can get. Never asked her where she wanted to go. She was my little Koopy doll, sitting out here on this little pedestal, and I was the original, or came out of the original 1940s and 50s chauvinist background. That's what I was raised around. You take care of your woman. The flip side of that is then she takes care of you. And she makes you feel special. Because that's what Mama did. And that's what I saw. That's what our relationship was. And it was fun. She loved it. I loved it. And Bonnie said, what would you like to do? I love Burns, but is there anything you want to do? And she said, I'd like to go back to school. So Bonnie said, why don't you just talk with Burns about it? Just see, y'all talk it out. So she came up, curled up with me on the couch. She said, I think I'd like to go back to school. She only had 1 year of college. She said, I'd like to go back to school, and I want to become a counselor. I said, I think that's great. I think that's great. So she went off to school. A month later, I was pissed. And I don't mean a little bit pissed. I mean pissed. Because I would come home at night and the lights weren't on. The meal wasn't fixed. I didn't realize going back to school would change that. I never even thought about it. So I'd go tell my sponsor I'm pissed. He'd say, well, pray about it. And I'd just go over there and I'd just pray my little butt off. Didn't get any better. I didn't have any 4 columns to go to. I didn't have any way to look at what was. I really had no way to look at my part. And probably most of all, I had no spiritual bridge between the 3rd and 4th column where I could pray, how can I help her? You know, we talk about praying, but do we ever make it specific? The big book does, for me. Even saying this is a sick person, how can I help them? God, take away my anger. I will tell you from personal experience, that will blast the paint off of hell. To pray for somebody, how can I help them? It's the equivalent to me of Jesus turning the other cheek. Not what they did to me, but what can I do for them? This is my personal experience. Not with this particular case, it got there, but with cases since that time. Again, resentments where I literally feel that God would want me to shoot the son of a bitch. That's all there is to it. I know God wants me to kill him. And some of my great heroes on TV are those who equal the earth's inequities. They shoot the bad guys. And that's my vision of what I want to be someday, is shoot the bad guys, you know, so that I can cleanse the world of all the bad guys. Now, I'm going to be in charge of deciding who the bad guys are, though. I need to tell you that. So the next thing is I realized, okay, I'm resentful, and then I got to getting scared because Casey is, 14, as I said, 14 years younger than me, and this goes back to, you know, she was in her early 30s, and I don't know how many of you ever met my wife, but she's still an extremely attractive lady, but she was drop dead gorgeous at that time. And I thought one of them young studs down there on that campus is going to drag my woman away from me. I mean, that's what's going to happen. And then I got to thinking, no, somebody's going to drag her off in the bushes and rape her. I had all this fear, self-centeredness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. I'd go to my sponsor and I'd say, I'm all this, pray about it. Pray and pray. Nothing happened. I was pissed and I was scared. And the book refers to repeatedly an easier, softer way, doesn't it? We picked other ways to deal with it. I mean, you can sit right here and watch the devil saying, I just about got him. Let me see. What does he really worship most of all? How about sex and money? Well, he ain't that much on money. How about sex? That'll get him. That'll get him. Especially get me a good looking one that says, you the best I've ever had. I can't imagine anybody better than you. You've known her for about 15 minutes, and she's already told me that I'm the best that she's ever had. I know she's lying, but I don't care. You understand? I just don't care. Now, this is amusing, but I don't know about the women, but I'm looking at the men go, you know? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And about that time, here I've got all this resentment, I got all this fear, and I'm talking to my sponsor, and I don't know how to inventory, and I don't know how to do this. I'm praying. I don't even know what I'm praying about, except take away the way I hurt, take away the way my pain, but it doesn't have anything in there to even remotely get me to a point of dealing with what I have to deal with. That at least a spiritual awakening is the result of these steps. I had a nurse. I was in practice. There were 15 of us in practice at that time, and I had a nurse named Kathy, who was a wonderful gal. She's still a wonderful gal. She's married. She had 2 boys at that time. That was when the nurses took care of doctors and made them feel special. Now, the new nurses ain't buying that crap, let me tell you that. But the old nurses did. And, I mean, she constantly took care of me, and she'd been working for me for 2 years and had never been a thought. And all of a sudden, this young lady began to really look like the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. She smelled better than anybody I'd ever smelled. She walked sexier than anybody I'd ever seen walk. And so I had an affair for about 3 months. 10 years sober with a 3-step program. With a 3-step program. You know, there's no question. I had the first 3 steps in about 15 seconds, somewhere between Thanksgiving and December the 1st of 1977. when I sat with a 12-gauge shotgun in my mouth with 2 empty quart bottles of whiskey beside me and couldn't quit drinking, was one of the most successful practices in the city of Louisville, with one of the most beautiful wives you could ever have, who adored me and worshiped her. She was my fiance at that time. I had everything, cars in the garage, the whole, and couldn't quit drinking. I had everything. And we'll talk about it in more detail, but God came and visited me that night by having me think of my children when I asked him to give me a reason not to pull that trigger. I had as good an ass whipping as anybody's ever had in this room. And I don't care how big an ass whipping you've had. Now, I'm not being vulgar. When Papa Brady used to plow behind an old one-mule plow, back in southern Graves County, just south of Paducah, in a little town called Mayfield. Actually, he lived out in an area called Sedalia. And he'd ride behind old Lightning on that one furrow plow, and I'd run along beside Papa. This was in the late 30s, early 40s. And I'd ride along, or run along behind Lightning and Papa, and I remember picking up a clod and hitting Lightning in the butt. And he kicked at Papa, and Papa said, "Burns Mac, don't do that." I said, "Yes, sir, Papa." We went on living. I busted that mule again, kicked at Papa, and he said, "Burns Mac, don't do that." Busted that mule the third time. He whooped and went over, and he got himself a little switch, came back and just switched the hell out of my legs. And I remember sitting there crying. I said, "Papa, what's that?" He said, "Burns Mac, that's an ass whipping. If you don't want nothing, don't hit that mule again." So I had really had a really, really good ass whipping. I mean, I pray that every one of you have an ass whipping that bad, because it'll make recovery easier. I didn't say it'd make it easy, but it'll make it easier. It'll make it, at least it has for me. So I'd had a sufficient ass whipping, and I knew it'd take a power greater than me, and I turned my life and my will over, and I've never looked back. It has continued to grow in depth. It has continued to grow in most every scope you would imagine it would grow in, with a daily spiritual process of starting, living, and ending the day. Virtually a spiritual awakening is the result of these steps multiple times throughout every day. And that very exposure I had, and I grew up in the church, so it wasn't that I was naive about this, but that very exposure I had at that time through AA has been a continued growing process of a relationship with a power greater than me that I thought would never reach where it is today. So I had the first 3 steps, but I didn't have the last 9. I was driving back one night. I'd been out to Kathy's house, and I was driving back. Oh, it got so damn crazy at that time. I thought, I love Casey and I love Kathy. I think they're really both really good women. I think if we just all sit down and talk about this, we could live together. Now, y'all see that as ridiculous. I mean, I didn't see it as ridiculous. I mean, these were really, I'm not even being funny. I thought, I've often wondered, I bet you if we'd have tried, we might have pulled that deal off. Yeah, I don't, that's the way it gets sometimes. But I was driving back, and I kept remembering, if you're honest, you can get it, and if you're not honest, you can't. If you're honest, you can get it, and if you're not honest, you can't. And I thought, I got a secret, and I got a lie. It's the only thing I'd never told my sponsor about in 10 years. And I went and told him, and he called my wife and told her. I learned a lot of things about that. I've never been without a sponsor. I've had 3 sponsors, and I've never been. The longest I was without a sponsor was between that sponsor and the next one, is about 3 months. But what I found out is sponsors aren't God. And I made my sponsor a God. He was my God. Now, that ain't too bad a deal for a year, 6 months, 2 years, whatever time it takes. But I'll tell you, when I sponsor somebody and they come up to me and say, I want what you got, and I'm going to say, okay, let's sit down and talk about what we're going to do, how to run my life, you see what you want to do, what goes on in this whole deal, and then let's see if we got what we want from each other. But if you expect me to walk on water, you better show me where the stumps are, because I'm a drunk just like you, and I'm one drink away from being drunk. And that's what sponsors are. For me anyway, they're wonderful angels, but they ain't God. And if a good sponsor is a good sponsor, he's going to start off, and at least as I see it, as I do it, and say, I'm not God. I'm just like you. I'm an alcoholic who today is going to try to use these steps and this fellowship and this design for I don't have to take a drink and that I don't hurt anybody. So let's go try it if that's what you want. Well, my sponsor loved to be God, and I loved to have him run my life. I thought it was wonderful. I said, God, I don't know what to do. I mean, this was all crammed into about 2 weeks. When I got home that night, Casey came out and sat down and said, Jim called and said, you're having an affair. Is that true? And I said, Casey, it's a fantasy. Because I knew it was over. And she said, are we okay? And I said, if you are, I am. And we've been in therapy since that time to look at some of the scars that got caused in that. And the conversation has gone exactly as you would see the big book outline it. Sometimes we just don't go through the rest of the deal. We just hug, say our prayers, work our program, and go on. I'm not telling you that's what you have to do. I'm not telling you that's what you should do. I'm telling you what the book gives us various options. And that was the way our option came out. But right then and there, I said, God, I don't know what to do. This man's been running my life for all this time. I can't trust him. I don't know what to do. A little sponsee of mine came up with his handful. He had 8 tapes in his hand. They were Joe and Charlie's tapes of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. He said, would you listen to these tapes and see if they're any good? And I listened to them and cried all the way through them because I realized that this was the whole program of Alcoholics Anonymous. It was a 12-step program, and I had a 3-step program. I remember I asked God right then, I said, God, if this is the program, I love you so much. Why did you leave me out here like this? Why did you do this? And I could feel his voice say, son, you may impress a lot of people with what you know, but you'll help heal a lot of people with your experience, strength, and hope. Never, ever talk to another group of people or sponsor anybody that you don't tell them the difference between a 3-step program and a 12-step program. It's your choice. It's my choice. Even after we get in, it's our choice each day. Do I want to live a 3-step program today, or do I want to live a 12-step program today? Been a number of years now that I've chosen to live a 12-step program one day at a time. And I got to tell you, there's nothing any better that's ever happened in my life. There's nothing any better. I grew up in a little town in western Kentucky named Mayfield. I grew up in a home where there was no alcohol, no drugs. My grandfather, my mother's father, died drinking bleach in the Mayfield City Jail in 1934. He was the town drunk. My mother was molested physically, emotionally, and spiritually, emotionally, and physically in that home. She was what we call an adult child of an alcoholic. Now, if you have a problem with that therapeutic term, just read the first page of the chapter of the family afterward. It said if you're around one of us, you get neurotic. And I adored my mother. She died prematurely at 64 in 1978. I miss my mother virtually every day. I adored her alive. I adore her dead. She was just a tremendous player in my life and a wonderful, wonderful spirit. She was goofier than hell, but she was a wonderful, wonderful spirit. And part of that goofiness was because she never had a way to deal with the shame and the rage and the guilt and all that went on in that home. I mean, she lived virtually her entire life believing everybody in Mayfield, Kentucky, a little town of 12,000, remembered her as the daughter of the town drunk. And hell, when I remember growing up in that town, nobody even knew who my grandfather was. But my mother thought everybody knew that she was the daughter of the town drunk. And the way that came out in my home, at least for me, was conditional love. I was mother's way back. I was her vicarious way to credibility. And what that demanded of me, without it even being said, was I had to be perfect. Now, it wasn't just my perception of having to be perfect. It was the fact I made a B when I was in the 3rd grade, and my mother didn't speak to me for almost 6 weeks. That's the last damn B I ever made. You can bet your butt on that. If you'd have seen my average and my performance through high school and college, you'd have thought one day I might be Pope, and I'm not even Catholic. I mean, I literally was the perfect kid. And there's no doubt what that motive was about. It was for Mama's approval. Bill Wilson wrote, for me, the second best thing he ever wrote in 1953. He called it Emotional Sobriety. That was published in the Grapevine in the late 50s. And remember now, Bill had been through an incredible amount of depression. If you study Bill Wilson's life, you will understand and appreciate and embrace the power of God. You can't keep from it when you look at this piece of raw material that was taken and forged into the whole instrument of why we're here. The very thing that many times I seem to take for granted, and the profundity and the things that went on to get us here tonight are virtually beyond comprehension. And I would strongly encourage any of you to study the history of Alcoholics Anonymous. Don't just start back in 1935. Don't even go all the way back to the late 1700s and Benjamin Rush, and come right on up through the temperance movements, and come right on up through Macaulay, come right on up through the Emmanuel movement. Go through the Washingtonians. Look at all the synchronicity or coincidences that occurred that finally led to that day when AA began. And I mean, you'll just sit down and cry. If AA means to you what it means to me, if it has changed and will change your life as much as it has and continues to change my life, you will absolutely just sit and sob with gratitude and the overcoming, the power of what overcomes you, and thinking, my God, this thing is incredible. This thing is absolutely incredible. And Wilson had the worst depression that you've ever seen. He and Lois, between 39 and 41, lived in 55 different places. They had no home. About 1944, Wilson went into a morbid depression that lasted for almost 10 years. He literally would have to walk at times and time his steps with his breathing so his feet would move. He would go to bed for weeks on end. Yet during that time, he wrote some of the most incredible stuff he ever wrote. And he's coming out of it in 53. He really doesn't get clear until 54, and he doesn't totally break free until he turned this organization over to us in 1955. And when I left from starting and running the impaired physicians program for the state of Kentucky for 16 years, I'll tell you, I really understood. I started in 1992, left that sucker 16 years later, and the minute I walked out that door and got in my car, I thought somebody had just given me wings and taken the damn tether off my feet, and I never knew it. I never knew it. And I watched read Wilson and what he does after 55. But he's coming out of it in 54, and he writes this incredible letter called Emotional Sobriety. And in there he says every one of his problems came from his need for approval. I've held men in my lap big enough to eat that wall, out of the prison, out of the homeless shelter, listening to their fifth step as they told me stuff that they would never tell anybody. And they're sitting there waiting for me to call them a name and say, filthy, get away from me. And I'm stroking the back of their head. And for the first time, they've got somebody of their own sex generally who is sitting there saying, it's okay. We'll walk through this. And that need for my mama's approval just absolutely was everything to me. Not that it was unique to me, or even to alcoholics. But just the relationship of a parent and the child is based on that to a great extent. And we know this. When I got to AA, it was the first place that said, number one, you don't have to be perfect. Number two, you can't be perfect. And number three, we're going to give you a set of rules and tools to deal with the fact that you can't be perfect. But the first place I learned about conditional love and working for that approval was my mama. Place was the church. Now, if you think I got a problem with the church, I sure don't. I'm a devout member of the church. I grew up in a particular Protestant religion where I got a row of medals for 12 years where I never missed Sunday school and church. And by God, if it hadn't been then, in 1977, when I had that shotgun in my mouth, I'd have blown the back of my head out if it hadn't been what I'd learned in church. And when I came out of my treatment experience, I came home and sat with my next door neighbor and best friend, an Episcopal priest, and we held hands, and I said, Jimmy, take me back to my church. He said, I can do that, Burns, but you got to go to AA. They have better success with us, with alcoholics, than the church does. Here's a man with a collar on. Now, I'd been 4 months in treatment, so I knew AA was where I had to go. But here's a priest, my best friend, saying, go to AA. I'll take you back to the church. So 8.5 years, I administered the chalice and the host and was a lay reader in the Episcopal Church. Finally, at the end of 8.5 years, my wife, my sponsor, my priest, and I sat down on Saturday, and we prayed and talked one whole Saturday about where my ministry would be. We call it service, but it's a ministry. Any way you cut it, they're interchangeable terms for me. And I said, now, if y'all want me to go to seminary, hell, I'll go. I said, I'd really rather have a root canal, but I'll go to seminary if that's where you want me to go. And finally, at the end of the day, no, your ministry, your service will be in AA. You got special experience there, blah, 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 and the whole deal. And I was relieved. God, I was relieved. So that's the way it was. So I adore the church. But the church that I grew up in, I'm not talking about Church Universal. I don't know about that. But the church I grew up in was conditional love. You believe this or you go to hell. You don't negotiate. There ain't no wiggle room. There ain't nothing. You believe this and do this or you go to hell. Well, I didn't have a lot of problem with Jesus. I had a real problem with sin. I was, and I'm not going for cheap humor, and if it offends anybody, I don't mean to, I don't think. But I was a 12-year-old, and I found some things. I just found it. First of all, I'd go to Sunday school and say, it's better to spill your seeds in the belly of a whore than on the ground. That's what they teach me. And I'm 12 years old, and I've just found a new pull toy, and I'm having a hell of a time. I mean, that's what 12-year-old little boys do. And yet I'm being told I'm going to hell. And I've got a dilemma every day. I have to make a choice on that day between hell and what 12-year-old little boys do. And guess who won? So I grew up steeped in this, and every Sunday we'd go down and altar call, and I'd go down and confess, and they'd baptize me again Sunday. I've been baptized more often than most of y'all have ever had a glass of water. I'm telling you, and I'm grateful because the guilt was just eating me up. But I learned from the church conditional love. You got to be perfect or we reject you. Now, this didn't make me an alcoholic. No, I'm an alcoholic because the big book says that we're bodily and mentally different. The 1990s has been called the decade of the brain. I did family medicine for 25 years, but for the last 20 years, I am an addiction specialist, and I walk with the big boys. My home is with you. When I go out there and work with the big boys, we work on what is this disease. Then we work on what is the treatment for this disease. And sometimes it gets crazy out there working with the big boys, especially the ones who are not in recovery, because they still believe that science is the answer to our problem. Science is the definition of the problem we've got. The solution to the problem we've got is spiritual. And thank God the research has caught up with it and told us that that is the best treatment, and that the 12-step system is the best delivery system for spirituality. But I can put the formulas on this wall to show you how we're bodily different. We truly have a disease. The best textbook that's ever been written for this disease is the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. It wrote it before anybody even thought about it. Before anybody ever thought about it. And today we've got the names to put to the formulas. Why women drink differently from men and the results that are physical. much more so than men. Why young people, these kids over here, why they drink different than me. I can go down and take every one of those kids, the ones that are still here, the ones who are still gone, who have left. I'll go out and meet them in the truck, see if I can't take them home with me before they get drunk, go out there and shoot somebody. But most of the kids that I can tell you how you drank. When I go into prison and I've got a 26-year-old kid sitting on the front row and he's looking at me like, who in the hell do you think you are, asshole? You know? And I sit right there and I say, let me tell you about your drinking. You started drinking when you were 10 or 11 years old. By the time you were 14, you'd been in jail at least once. Right now, they won't give you a car. They won't let you do crap because they can't depend on you to get to the grocery store. You don't drink that much beer, but when you do, you shoot out streetlights, you beat up people, you steal cars. I said, AA said you'd drink differently. From the old man who got drunk, who took him about 8 or 10 years to finally get to be a real stinking drunk. Thank you. Got to be a real stinking drunk. But he's going to stay socially responsible until he can't do it anymore. 2 quarts of whiskey a night, but I never drank in my office. I don't remember what I was telling that story for. There was a good reason for it. I'll go back and pick it up somewhere. Anyway, senility does creep in sometimes. I remember, and the big book wrote all of this about why we have this disease. I remember telling my sponsor when I was about 2 years sober, I said, I don't care if I've got a disease. I don't care, just teach me how not to drink. He said, you damn well better remember you got a disease. He said, because knowing you, one day you'll get so spiritual you'll think you can drink again. And we see it repeatedly, don't we? With the peculiar mental twist. Yeah, we've got a disease. We're born to quart low, or a half pint. Or at least a 6-pack. But we are literally born to quart low. I mean, our brain chemistry in certain important pieces, we're low. Or it doesn't work right, and we drink our drug, and it goes not just back to normal, it goes above normal. And we're just so happy. And we're having so much fun. And we're doing things that we thought we would never do, and it doesn't seem to be that bad. And then it turns on us. Now, our problem, and the book tells me clearly, is not my alcohol. No, alcohol was my medicine. Amphetamine was my medicine. It made it a level playing field. And we know this today. It's not just conjecture, it's fact. As I said, the 1990s has been called the decade of the brain. With better paradigms and better methodology, they have defined my disease. They have defined your disease. The 2000s so far has been to define, and with the advent of the human genome, we now are naming the genes and the chromosomes that are a part of the high-risk people. And it makes all the difference in the world. Wilson. Remember, Bill said, I wonder if I can stay sober and help another alcoholic achieve sobriety? He goes out and for 6 months, between December of 34 and when he got out to Akron in May of 35, he's running all over the place. Remember when Bill Borchert, who did My Name is Bill W., and when Love Is Not Enough, Bill's down in this little alley talking to these 2 drunks, and they're laughing at him. And Bill was showing when he comes out, he says to Lois, this isn't working. She said, yes, it is, you're sober. But she says to Bill, and this is not recorded much, but that part is, she said, why don't you go talk to Dr. Silkworth? Bill goes to see Silkworth, and Silkworth, who was a pretty energetic guy, but a pretty soft-spoken guy, he jumped on Bill like stink on feces. He just gets all over Bill, and he said, quit preaching. Tell him about the illness. When Bill goes out to see Dr. Bob, what does he do? He tells him about the illness. That's why my sponsor was saying to me, you've got a disease, and today we've defined it. No, that's why I'm an alcoholic. Normal people, 25 years of practicing medicine, and at least 60% to 70% of the people who came in my office, at least for the first 20 years, didn't have alcohol drug problems. The last 5 years, it was almost a pure alcoholic drug addicted practice. Because everybody came to me in Louisville because they knew, number one, I wouldn't laugh at them. Number two, I wouldn't give them medicine that would hurt them. And they came to see me. But in the early part, those people came in with the same problems that we have: self-centeredness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. Everybody has it. They got 10% of it. We got 90% of it. We are called stimulus augmenters. The chemistry that we're abnormal about makes us react like a dog in heat. I'm sitting at a red light and it turns green and somebody honks at me. Normal people just drive off. Not me. I sit there for at least 5 seconds. Do I give them the finger? Do I open the car and walk back there and threaten to whip their ass? I mean, this is an issue that must be resolved now. Am I making any sense? Now, let me tell you what the program has done for me. Instead of doing that, I just drive on off, and between this red light and the next red light, I'm doing an inventory. I'm resentful at this asshole behind me because he honked at me. This threatened my self-esteem, my ambition, my security, all of it. Yeah, he's saying to me, "You don't amount to shit, you no good little son of a bitch. That's why I'm honking at you." The man's trying to get to the hospital. He's got chest pain for all I know, you know. But I've decided he's sitting there saying, "You don't amount to anything. Just move over and get your car off the road, you little wimp. Let me drive." Am I making any sense? I'm checking out at Kroger's the other day. And I'm walking by, and there's this little 18-year-old girl sitting there. You know, she's doing what she's doing, and I'm sitting there, and I'm saying, "Honey, how you doing?" She doesn't say a word. I said, "It's been a tough day, I bet, hasn't it?" She doesn't say a word. I said, "Is there anything I can do to help?" She doesn't say a word. "Well, if I can help, let me know." She doesn't. I'm thinking, "You bitch." You know? Yeah. Bring me the manager. I'm going to get this bitch fired. Here's a little 18-year-old, God knows what problems are in her life, and here I am, 74 years old, with enough plaques on the wall to plaster half of this damn town. I mean, I've been honored for everything for having athlete feet, you know, for God's sake. And this little 18-year-old is walking me around just like she's got me by the short hairs, walking me around just like this. I mean, she owns me lock, stock, and barrel, right? 33 years of recovery, and I am down fighting in the trenches with an 18-year-old who just doesn't say, "You must be Dr. Brady. I'm sorry I didn't see you before. God, you're gorgeous." You know, something like that. Right? It's funny, but it's real, isn't it? It's real. Think about your life. How many times today have you been right at that point where you're going to have to sit and do the inventory of the 10th step? Have I been self-centered, dishonest, resentful, and fearful? I'm going to ask God to remove it. I'm going to talk to somebody. I'm going to make my amends if indicated, and I'm going to help somebody. It's a day-at-a-time process. I don't care if you're 75, 105, how many years of sobriety. The deal is that life is unmanageable. Second half of the first step is the main problem I've got. Every problem I've got comes out of the second half of the first step, and every solution I've got comes out of all 12 steps. Every problem I've got comes from an unresolved second half of the first step. Who's in charge? Because I'll guarantee you, most of my conflict comes out of believing that I can control the outcome. It's just instinctive. It's called survival. And somewhere in all of us, it's been bred down to the very last core. It's the normal instinct. It's not because I'm an a-hole. It's just because I'm human and terrified most of the time that I'm going to get the hell kicked out of me and they're going to draw a crowd so you can watch. That's that fear that sits in the pit of my stomach when I wake up in the morning. Not anymore. Not anymore, because when I get up in the mornings, I start off with the 3rd step prayer, the 7-step prayer, and on awakening. Is that what it says? It's amazing how us rocket scientists can screw that up. And every time I move throughout the day from one room to the next, or from my office to the medical school, or from the medical school to the prison, I do a 10th step. Every time I move. Have I been self-centered, dishonest, resentful, or fearful? What does it say at the end of the 11th step? As alcoholics, we are undisciplined. We allow God to discipline us this way. That's what it says. It's what it says to me. And that discipline is exactly what he spent from the 3rd chapter to the 7th chapter. The steps. The steps. Woven into a fellowship which is indescribably wonderful. And tonight when I go to bed, I will do the 11th step on retiring. Have I been self-centered? It's not just a prayer. Oh no, I call it the AA rosary. If he hadn't meant it to be done that way, it's probably likely he wouldn't have written it that way. That's just what I tell me when I decide I'm going to write the next great Bible, or at least the 2nd greatest big book. And I'm going to include the little things that might be better that Wilson would have probably changed if he were still alive today. I tell you what, living with me is a hoot. I enjoy it. I'm not the craziest sumbitch on earth, but I'm crazy enough to be fun. I got to tell you that. As long as I'm with you doing what I'm supposed to do, and I don't walk around scared of the one thing I'm scaredest of in my life, and that's me. And that's me. Because I have proved I'm capable of doing anything. When I was a freshman in alcohol and drugs, no problem for me in high school. They were no problem for me in college. When I started my freshman year in medical school, I was really shook up at the first gross anatomy exam. One of my upperclassmen came down and gave me a little pill called amphetamine. You can call it Adderall, call it whatever you want to call it, but it was amphetamine. This part of my story is about, I'm a card-carrying, commode-hugging, 12-gauge shotgun in the mouth, 2 quarts of whiskey a night drunk. But for 12 years, I took amphetamine with no alcohol, and for 8 years, I drank alcohol with no amphetamine. I'm a living example of what we need to be telling everybody, at least when you've worked for 16 years with a whole bunch of doctors, you've been sober 33 years, and you spent 4 years working with at least 500 people in prison on a daily basis. When you've done that, then come and talk to me about it, but I will tell you that I have only one story, and I haven't heard God tell me what part of it I'm supposed to leave out. When he sends me a message, I'll leave that part out. The first part of my story has to do with drugs. And the reason why I know it's important is because I've worked with too many people. I've worked with too many people that have never been able, who are drunks, who have never been able to talk about the drugs. Not even to their sponsor. I'm not going to get in a harangue with anybody. I'm just telling you that this is my story. I can explain to you what happened to me, but my story means more. I took amphetamine for 12 years, no alcohol, drank whiskey for 8 years with no amphetamine. Both of them kicked my butt, tore me apart, destroyed me. And my message is for people who have not yet figured out that the marijuana maintenance program is not going to work. That if alcohol is your problem and you quit drinking, you think you can do a little cocaine, smoke a little dope. If you're an alcoholic of my type, it ain't going to work. Your call is to decide if you're an alcoholic of my type, which is the hopeless variety. But I will tell you it will not work. And my experience is, I took amphetamine for those 12 years. Starting my freshman year in medical school, I got kicked out of medical school 2 weeks before graduation my senior year in '62 for slapping one of my professors. in an amphetamine rage. They put me in intensive psychiatric therapy for 2 years. I saw 2 psychiatrists a week. For 2 years, I quit taking amphetamine, didn't take it for 2 years, didn't drink, had a wonderful experience, studied all my medicine, all of my notes, all of my textbooks, went back into medical school, walked into the old university hospital. In less than 2 hours, I was strung out on amphetamine again and just sat on the steps and cried because I didn't know what was wrong with me. Now, you know what was wrong with me. Psychiatry brought me information. Psychiatry brought me knowledge. We're not anti-psychiatry. At least I'm not. I'm anti-ignorance. And I've spent the last 25 years of my life trying to eradicate that ignorance in the medical profession, and the last 15 years of my life trying to eradicate that ignorance in the AA community. We got a whole bunch of doctors who don't know how to treat us, and we got a whole bunch of people in AA practicing medicine without a license. Now, I will tell you that I understand why we do that, because we have been hurt so many times by ignorant physicians. And I will not tell you that there are not a whole bunch of ignorant physicians still around. But I will tell you, all I've got is my experience, strength, and hope, and I don't practice medicine in AA. I practice my experience, strength, and hope. When I practice addiction medicine, then I practice addiction medicine. In any event, my classmates enabled me. I graduated. Started my internship and residency, was interrupted 4 times, put in a mental hospital, spent almost 2 years in a mental hospital at 6-month intervals. I just get so wound up with that crap, and I just go crazy. Finally, got my internship and residency finished, went into private practice, still taking drugs. Vietnam War was raging. I was pissed off at the Vietnam War. I was pissed off because I wanted us to either win it or get the hell out. It wasn't a bad position, but I was full of amphetamine in the doctor's lounge one day and was just raising hell about it. And somebody said, well, if you feel that strongly about it, then why don't you just join the Army? And I sat there and looked at him, and I said, that's a good idea. Went out and got in the car and went to Frankfurt and joined the Army. Didn't call my wife, didn't call my office, didn't call anybody. I just joined the Army. One of the psychiatrists that treated me after that said I had an impulse disorder. he was half right. I'm an alcoholic who naturally has an impulse disorder. That's what we, the old load, shoot, and aim deal that we do all the time. That's the way we solve problems, load, shoot, and aim in that sequence. Went in the Army, almost got court-martialed for taking the drugs. Quit taking the drugs again for a year, came home, got back on them, had a gallbladder attack, took out my gallbladder, and the surgeon, who was a good friend of mine, internist, a good friend of mine, went to medical school together, and we sat there and prayed that I'd quit taking amphetamine. My last amphetamine was 1969. Then I started drinking. First 4 years of my drinking wasn't alcoholic. I got drunk a lot. Didn't get up to get drunk. Didn't get up not to get drunk. I just got up in the morning, did my job, and at night I drank. It was no problem. Next 2 years was alcoholic. Every morning when I got up, I knew my first drink would be at 4:30. I didn't have any problem not drinking in the day, but I knew my first drink would be at 4:30. Had a very successful practice. One partner at that time, I'd come in early, see the emergencies, see my appointments at 4:30. I walked out. He cleaned up the rest of the day, and I was gone. I would go over to the grocery and get my quart of whiskey and drink that quart of beer and drink it on the way home, get my scotch and water and get smooth. Y'all remember getting smooth? That's why those of us who are successful in this program are successful, because we remember getting smooth, like that. And if we don't remember it, we'll forget it. Book tells us that. We'll just forget it. There are a lot of reasons I go to AA meetings, but one of the biggest ones I go to AA meetings for is because every time I walk in the room, I'm reminded of what I am. And I've seen too many people who go into meetings who just forgot what they are. They just forgot. And the book says we're going to forget. There'll come a day, right? That's what it says. So a lot of reasons to go to AA meetings, but that's certainly one of them. Last year, my drinking was addictive. I drank 2 quarts of whiskey a night for almost 2 years. Never drank in my office. Casey and I lived in an apartment. My first wife had kicked me out of the house. The divorce went on until 1977, so we couldn't get married. and it was hell. I can start it about anywhere, but I usually start at 11 o'clock in the morning. I'd be sitting in a reclining chair with the whiskey bottles beside me, and I'd just come out of whatever I was in. I'd take a Valium to stop shaking, go see my patients in about 2 hours, which normally took me 6 or 8. Reason I could do it that quick because I never said anything to anybody. I went in, looked at the chart, saw what the nurse had to tell me, went in, examined the patient, ordered the test, got them, looked at them, made the diagnosis, wrote the prescriptions, had my nurse tell them what was wrong, moved to the next patient. I quit being a doctor and became a highly trained technician, and it was destroying me. I absolutely revered being a doctor and still do. And for the right reasons. I really enjoyed being a doctor. I missed practicing. I've missed it a lot because I really enjoyed people and enjoyed what I was doing with people, and I wasn't doing it then to talk to people. I was trying to get the hell out because I was going into DTs. And if I stayed there longer than 2 hours, I wasn't going to make it. When I came back from treatment, I sat with my partner and we reviewed my charts to see if I'd hurt anybody. And I practiced technically good medicine. But I stopped being a doctor in 1975. I just became a highly trained technician. It tore my heart out. I would race home then, and Casey would have my broiled steak and baked potato waiting for me, and I'd eat that to save my liver because I was a doctor and knew I was destroying my liver, but there was no way I was going to quit drinking because I couldn't. I'd sit down with my 2 quarts of whiskey after I had my broiled steak, baked potato, and put on the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, the Philadelphia Philharmonic Orchestra doing the Battle Hymn of the Republic. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming, and I'd just cry. Great song, still cry when I hear it, different tears. I mean, I did. My second record was Neil Diamond's I Am, I Said. And my hero is talking to a chair. Now, Neil had a real problem, but if you ever listen to that record, it said, I've got an emptiness deep inside and it won't let me go. I'm not a man who liked to swear, but I never cared for the sound of being alone. And that's where I was. I'd finally go over about 4 or 5 in the morning and lay down in that recliner. Casey would come in every morning or every night and say, please go to bed. I'd say, I'm crazy. I'm going to drive you crazy. Get away from me. And then the next day and the next day. And that one morning she'd gone to work and I woke up, or I got up and I knew it was over. I said, God, you've got to help me. And I knew immediately what I had to do. And I walked in my bedroom, got my 12-gauge shotgun, put it in my mouth, and I was out of here. I was at complete peace. I really believed in God. God lived on a cloud and looked like Charlton Heston, the Easter Bunny, the Tooth Fairy, and all at once. And as soon as I shot myself, I would go to heaven and be with God. I have had people say, theologically, that's not sound. I don't know about theologically. I just know that's what I believe. God was here. And as soon as I died, I would go to God. I had no way of bringing that power into me. When you read the chapter of the agnostic, it says lack of power. That's our dilemma. Isn't that what it says? Lack of power. That was our dilemma. What the 12 steps in this fellowship have done for me is to many things, but they've allowed this power to be a part of me today. God still lives up here, and some days I climb up in his lap just like Santa Claus. But he means so much more to me. But that power, through the steps in this fellowship. I said, God, if you don't want me to pull this trigger. In fact, it's an interesting thing. Said, those of us who spent much time in the world of spiritual make-believe have eventually seen the childishness of it. You remember reading that in the book? It's in the family afterward. God wants us to have our head in the clouds with him, but our feet must be firmly planted on earth. That's where our fellow travelers are, and that's where our work is to be done. I said, God, if you don't want me to pull this trigger, let me know. And I'm sitting there, and I said, Casey will be better off. Mom and Dad, patience, got to my babies. I've got a daughter who's 50 who's been in AA 30 years. I've got a son who's 45 who's been in AA for 27. They both could have been in when they were 5, probably. But they were little babies at that time, or small children, and I remember thinking to them, pull this trigger, they'll never know why Daddy didn't love them that much. Because I'd been in practice 8 years, and I'd seen people come into me impaled on this, why didn't Daddy love me enough? Why didn't Mama love me enough? Why did they do this? Why did they do that? I thought those babies will never, ever know. It was going to be 15 years later in AA that I realized what an incredible spiritual experience I had that night. It came as I had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. And I told you I wasn't there for almost 12 or 14 years. But when I did, I realized that spiritual experience, that when I asked my God to give me a reason not to kill myself, he had me think of another human being. Why are we here? I'm asking you. If you know the book, you know. Our purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and our fellow man. That's what it says. Isn't that what it said? He had me think of another human being. This program is not about me. It's not about you. In my opinion and in my experience, it's about our getting ready for them when they get ready to come to us. If we ain't ready, they ain't going to make it. If we ain't ready, they ain't going to make it. Laid the gun down, went to treatment. 4 months in treatment, came home, got into AA, told you about the first 10 years, got into the book, made the amends, cleaned up my mess with Kathy, cleaned up my mess with Casey. Casey and I had some scars that were left, not anything with our love, not even with our trust, but we had some things that we needed to work on and really weren't sure where the bullets were coming from. Most of them was my family of origin, and a lot of it was her family of origin. But this time, Casey had a really deep commitment to and living the 12 steps. I had developed that. We took strong 12-step programs into some couples therapy. And the therapist knew that the only solution we knew to what he would lead us into seeing was a 12-step solution. He said, I'm not going to work on your solution. You got sponsors. You know what to do. We're going to see if we can figure out where the bullets are coming from. And, of course, that's where I learned that my mama took care of me and made me feel special. All she asked me to do was everything that I had to do to get her approval. That's why I learned that was my relationship with all women. I'll give you anything you want. You just got to take care of me. You don't take care of me, we ain't got no deal. The crazy women stayed with me. The smart women got the hell out. Because that wasn't no deal. That's called hostage taking. I don't know how many women hostage, but what I didn't realize for a number of years is, by God, the crazy ones were taking me hostage, so we had a hell of a living. And that's when Casey and I got together, that's what I meant about the pathology and the love. About 7 or 8 years ago, I began to wonder why I'd really never had peace. I knew I'd had joy and I knew I had happiness, but I wasn't sure why I hadn't had peace. And I didn't think that I'd had any peace. And I kind of equated peace with that feeling, you know, when you have that first drink and you just kind of relax. I thought that was peace. Well, I couldn't argue with it. It sure felt pretty damn good, right? So I went with my wife and my sponsor to see an addiction psychiatrist, and we sat down and he said, Burns, I know you and I know your program. Nobody has a better program than you that I know of. I said, I don't know why you can't step off on the shore. He said, I don't know what to tell you. As we were driving home, I said, Case, I think I'm going to start studying Bill Wilson. Tortured man. You know, if you're ever really wondering what went on with Wilson, go look at the story of Moses. Go look at the story of David. Go look at these stories of the Old Testament. Then look at what he did with Bill Wilson. He picked the most wounded, and he put them in a position where faith was their salvation. Faith and works. Faith and works was their salvation. So I began to study Bill Wilson, and I found what I was looking for. Father Ed Dowling, a Jesuit priest in St. Louis, in 1940 read the big book and realized that this man Wilson had written the 12 steps, which were the reduction of the Ignatian spiritual exercise. Ignatius Loyola was the patron saint of the Jesuits. And he has this intense period of meditation that lasts over 2 weeks and is really intense. And Dowling looked at this and said, this man has reduced this to 12 steps. He made a special trip to New York to see Bill. This was in November of 1940. Now, history has taught us that if Ed Dowling hadn't been in Bill's life from 1940 to 1960, it's really hard to know what might have happened to Bill, what might have happened to us. So it is a very, very, very synchronicity type of thing, because Dowling was Wilson's gyroscope to reality through some real intense problems that Wilson had to deal with. And I won't go into those, they're in the history books. But he came to see Wilson in November of 1940. It's a dark, rainy night. Lois is gone. History hadn't told us where she was. She probably hadn't gotten home from work yet. They're living in the 21st Street Clubhouse, the first place they'd had to live that even was not one of their friends. And he's upstairs laying on the bed going through one of his hypochondriacal fits. Wilson was a hypochondriac. Every time he got a bellyache, he thought he was bleeding to death. I mean, he was an absolute hypochondriacal hysteric. That's what he was. I adore this man. If you don't think I do, just come talk to me, because I relate to him. Oh, hell, I became a doctor. I found this out in therapy, so I'd never, ever not know what was wrong with me again. And that was the worst damn thing. That was the worst damn thing could have ever happened to me, because now y'all get a belly pain, you got a little bit of upset stomach. I get a belly pain, and I've got mesenteric thrombosis. I've got a ruptured aortic aneurysm. I've got worms the size of baseball bats crawling in my colon. Hell, now I've got the differential. I'm not kidding you. Ask my wife sometimes. So Wilson's up there going through his hypochondriacal fit, and the caretaker comes up and says, somebody's here to see you, and Bill said, send him up. Oh, no, not another alcoholic. So here he comes. Dowling's coming down the hall, tapping his cane, 5'6", shocky white hair, pugsy face. He walks in, got his coat on. Wilson says, take your coat off and let's talk. He takes his coat off and he sees his collar. And they sit down and start talking. And in the process, they fell in love. And Wilson asked Dowling, will I ever know peace? And Dowling said, no. He said, why? He says, you've been blessed with divine dissatisfaction. Your seeking will bring so many people home, and that will bring you home. And I knew that what I thought was my curse was really my blessing. I had known peace. I just hadn't defined it right. 3 years ago, when I quit working at the paired physicians, I went to the prisons. I spend 4 days a week in the prisons, from 8 in the morning, sometimes till 8 at night. And it's a structured way of dealing in 2 large SAP programs. I thought that I had really known what service work was about, and I have, and I had. But I never knew where God was going to take me. And my God, what a journey. I found exactly where I fit. We were talking a while ago, and I said I went out there one night to talk, and I wasn't sure where God wanted me to be. And I went in and talked to 8 of those men, and 6 of them were asleep, and I walked out, and I said, this is where I want to be. I have driven home from that prison with screaming with tears of joy. Absolute joy. I'm not sure what a 4th dimension is, but I think I'm there. If there's another dimension, bring it on. But I'm at a place that I've never been before in my life. I never knew that I could have this much pure joy. Absolute joy, all in service, carrying the message to a place where the message just wasn't getting there. Appreciate you letting me come. Sorry I'm so long-winded. I don't get to talk that much anymore. Y'all have sat there very quietly. For those of you who are still awake, I appreciate it. For those of you who are asleep, I'm glad you didn't snore, but I'm certainly glad to be back. I love you very much.